Hey everybody, what's going on? Thank you for stopping by and welcome to the Buckeye Zone. This is where we break down anything and everything related to our favorite college football program, the Ohio State Buckeyes. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the possibility of the expansion of the college football playoffs. But before I do tell you about that proposal, and before I tell you my thoughts about it, let's take a quick history lesson on how exactly we got to this point. I mean, when it first came out that we were going to have a playoffs, I thought this was a excellent idea because what we had in the past just wasn't quite working. For about a whole entire century, the national champion was actually declared by a bunch of sports writers. It wasn't declared by games or players out on a field. No, it was by a bunch of sports writers who thought who was the best team in the entire country. And I have no idea why that came about, why there wasn't a system in place. Honestly, it's just an epidemic or a failure by the NCAA because, ultimately they're the ones that are responsible for college athletics. And it's just ridiculous what, this organization has done in the past and things that they've done moving forward, especially with name, image, and likeness. And I'd like to, do a podcast show on that coming up. But there's a lot of questionable things that they've done. And it's just kind of ridiculous that, they were declare a national champion without actually playing a game between two teams. Just seems mind-boggling to me. And moving forward, up until 1998, they put in place the Bowl Championship Series, the BCS, and they left the national championship to be determined by a bunch of computers. And to some extent, it was also done by some humans too, because of they would take into account the coaches poll and the media poll. And then, of course, some other set of calculations. They would just go out and spit out, here's the top teams based on these figures and statistics that these computer models created. And, just be happy that you're getting a national championship game. And these polls, I guess they serve their purpose. I guess it did give us, a national championship game, but it was lacking. And there were some growing concerns for a number of years there, whether or not they were getting the right two teams in place. And there was a growing bias that the SEC, they were always represented and everybody else. And, I don't think there was really a issue with it, at least from what I could see. They were always pumping out the most NFL draft picks, and they won 7, 8 national championships in a row. I mean, you had Florida and Bama and LSU and Auburn. They were just cranking them out. But, it left somewhat of a distaste to people because the SEC was always represented in the biggest game. And it just rubbed people the wrong way. And I think what put it over the edge was after the 2011 season, that 2012 national championship game. If you remember, it was between Alabama and LSU. And that was a rematch game from the SEC championship game. LSU ended up winning the conference, but then lost the national title game. And in a lot of people's eyes, including myself, that just didn't seem right. And that year, if you remember, Oklahoma State, the Cowboys, they finished second in most of the polls. And honestly, they probably should have represented, the other team from the SEC, and they should have probably competed against LSU for the national title. But, that was a system we had in place. The BCS did their little calculations and they figured, nope, it should be a rematch between Alabama and LSU. So I think was the tipping point, tip of the iceberg, whatever. People just got tired of it. Constantly seeing the SEC represented, and they wanted more. And, rightfully so. We should have a playoffs. All the other divisions in college football, Division II, Division III, heck, here locally, we have an NAIA team. St. Francis Cougars here in Fort Wayne, they're competing in a playoff system. And it's like, why can't the big boys figure it out? Why can't the NCAA step in and say, hey, we're going to create a playoff system? They really didn't. I mean, you have this committee that goes out and says who's going to represent the 4 best college football teams. I don't even know if they say best. They say the most deserving. But either way, it's the conference commissioners that came together and said, yeah, we need to have a playoff system. This is what we're going to have. We're going to have a committee sit down in a room for a number of weeks, watch a bunch of games, and say at the very end who the 4 teams will end up being. And we were thrilled. All of us college football fans, it was like Christmas, really. Like, okay, now we're starting to get some momentum. Now we're starting to get towards a system where we all agree that this is what needs to happen. I mean, there's no other sport, at least, if you want to draw that line between professionally and with college teams, they all have a playoff. You got the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, they all have a playoff system. And for the most part, it works. But when you try to draw that line that says, we got to keep professional athletes separate from college kids, no, you really don't need to draw that line in the sand anymore. If you take a look at TV ratings and popularity, college football is the number 2 sport in America. You got the NFL and then college football. Those are the top 2 sports. And that's another thing that drives me nuts. We could go on another podcast and talk about the NCAA, honestly, and their decision making. There really should be, basically not just a conference commissioner, but the NCAA for at least college football should have its own commissioner and have uniform set of rules and guidelines on a whole host of different things. And while I keep, dreaming about that someday, this is what we've got. The college football playoffs is determined by a committee, and it's only 4 teams. And, now we're starting to get growing concerns that, it's always the same, basically same 3 teams that are making the playoffs. And if you're not a fan of one of those 3 teams, you're probably getting a little irritated. You're getting a little pissed off, and that, you want your team to be included. Or in some of your teams' cases or fan bases, you want your conference to be represented. I mean, the Pac-12 has been left out before. The Big 12 has been left out. I can see where people are starting to get a distaste in their mouth about this current system. It's not always, it seems like it's the best teams, but, with a 1-game scenario, there's opportunities for upsets. As an Ohio State fan, I really don't want to mention it, but how about in the Urban Meyer era, you got games against Purdue, Iowa. Ugh. Those were upsets. And, our defenses were lacking those 2 years. And so, of course, you can see the writing on the wall that, if they weren't playing, the best, they were going to get knocked off. So, I get it. There is a growing concern that it's the same couple of teams. But you know what? That's why I think they're looking into possibly increasing the number of teams by expanding the playoffs. And honestly, you just need to follow the money. I mean, anything that happens in life, mainly politics or sports, you just need to look at who's going to benefit financially. You can even do it in business, I guess, too. But as I'm sitting here thinking about it, just follow the money. Why are they just now thinking about expanding the playoffs? Because they weren't really talking about it before this year, right? I mean, the report came out, 2 weeks ago, saying that they have a working group that's going to be taking a look at the possibilities. And we'll look at their one scenario that came out that was public a little bit later here. But why now? I mean, we can go back in the history that what we've been doing, it hasn't been a perfect system. But, what was that tipping point? And honestly, I think it's because of 2020 and COVID, because, that really rocked these universities hard. It really did. A couple months ago, Ohio State's athletic department reported a loss of over $100 million. Whew, $100 million. That is some substantial amount of cash right there. You don't, because of COVID, you had all these lockdowns and restrictions. Not only did they not play a full season, a full schedule, but most of the fans weren't allowed into the stadiums. I mean, for Ohio State, you had friends and family, and that was pretty much it. But you didn't have the band. You didn't have even you didn't even have the mascot, cheerleaders. They didn't really have anybody there, and they took a financial hit. I mean, $100 million. I mean, you can easily see how it gets racked up. Have a stadium full of people, fans in there, rooting on your team, over 105, 108,000 fans. Think of the ticket sales, the sales that go along with the parking, concessions, merchandise. It racks up quick. And so, honestly, I think that's the whole reason why they're just now starting to take a look at expanding the playoffs. Not because it's going to improve the quality of games or the quality of the postseason. It's finances. It's all about money. I mean, football is the lifeblood of college athletics. Most of these other sports at these universities wouldn't exist. If you really want to be honest about it, they could just go away because they're basically a drain on, the athletic department's budget. I mean, there's maybe a handful of men's college basketball programs. And I guess also you could throw in UConn for women's basketball. But for the most part, I mean, my goodness, if you don't have a football program, then the rest of your athletic department just goes away. And so if, obviously $100 million for Ohio State is huge, but, all these other programs, all these other universities, they took a major hit as well. And I ended up finding a report from USA Today. They said expanding the college football playoffs could increase revenue by $2 billion. That's right, with a B, $2 billion. Currently, they're making about $600 million on this 4-team playoff. By the new proposal of adding some more teams, that they would end up making a 12-team playoff system, would create revenue of $2 billion. So that's all you need to know right there. It's all about the money. It's all about finances. And honestly, I want the playoffs to expand, but I don't want it to get watered down. I don't want it to be too big. I was kind of thinking maybe 8 teams, but 12, holy smokes. I just don't want it to become like March Madness because, honestly, I think March Madness kind of sucks. I really do. It's way too many teams. You got 64 and they expanded it to some playoff games to play-in games, I guess, to 68. That's just too many. Half those teams are not going to compete for a national title. It really is for show. I mean, it doesn't crown the best champion either. It's basically a tournament to see who's going to win that tournament. It's sometimes does the job right and crowns the true national champion. But I think a true playoff system would do that, not a tournament like in basketball. But in football, that's just the way we do it. Like in the NFL, I get it. You got to think about player safety and their health. So you can't really do like say the best of 3, like a series, like you can do kind of like in basketball or actually Major League Baseball or whatever. You got to have just one game determine the outcome. But 12, I think it's a bit much, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for me, I love the regular season. I believe it matters, and in our current system, you should be rewarded to compete in the playoffs if you win your conference championship. However, 4 spots just isn't enough, and I think people are starting to recognize that. I mean, 4, in my opinion, has never really made any sense, especially with they claim that 10 conferences could qualify for it. And we all know that's not true. We know the other, you got the Power 5 conferences and the other 5. And those other 5, the group of 5 teams, they're not going to compete. You've already seen it. It was difficult for them to compete in the BCS era. But in the college football playoff, no team from the MAC or Mountain West, Sun Belt, none of them are going to compete for a spot. Only one spot in the 4-team playoffs. It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. There's no way it's ever going to happen. I mean, shoot, you got Dabo Sweeney out there before this past year saying Ohio State didn't deserve it, and he ranked him 11th. 11th. Well, we got the final laugh on that one. And thankfully, they finally got over the hump and beat Clemson, because I was tired of hearing all those fanboys saying, oh, look, you're 0-4. Like, you don't deserve to be here. Like, okay. It was time to shut those boys up. But anyway, you've got to take a hard and deep look at what's going on here. I mean, there's only a limited number of spots, and the conferences, it's always going to be the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and then somebody else, most likely. But in all reality, I really do like the wild card scenario that the NFL and Major League Baseball has. I mean, it's interesting to have other teams competing, but when you lose like one game in the current climate, that could determine your team's entire fate. I mean, the entire season rests on every game, and I love the drama. It's exciting. It really is. I mean, every week you get a bunch of games that, could go either way. And if you have an upset, that just makes it even more worthwhile. And as an Ohio State fan, we understand this all too well. I mean, especially in recent memory. But, for the most part, Ohio State's had, the best team in the conference. And yeah, we'll stumble here and there, and knock ourselves out of a playoff scenario. And at that point, it's not really good for, say, the Big Ten or college football, because Ohio State's pretty much had the best team in the Big Ten for at least the last decade, if not last 2 decades. So for the most part, we kind of need to be represented in a playoff scenario. So now that we're here, now that we're actually talking about expanding the playoffs, what is this new playoff format going to look like moving forward? According to that report 2 weeks ago from the College Football Playoff Working Committee, it came out and said that they wanted that 12-team playoff system. So what exactly, would that look like? So under that proposal, a 12-team playoff would include the 6 highest ranked conference champions and 6 highest ranked teams as determined by the selection committee. So in the end, we're not getting rid of that selection committee. I mean, it's just moving on from 4 to 12. But if I read that again, the 6 highest ranked conference champions, and then 6 highest ranked teams as determined by that committee. Now, what's interesting, if you think 12, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You're going to have some first round buys. And so that's the way they've staged it, is that the first 4 or the 4 best teams would end up getting a first round bye. And the way that they phrased it would be the four highest ranked conference champions. So if you follow that right, that means Notre Dame would not be qualifying for a first round bye. I've got a lot of Notre Dame fans, so I would, like to throw in a jab here and there at them. But, another topic for someday we could discuss is, whether or not Notre Dame should be in a conference. But this is a Ohio State podcast, so we're not going to even worry about that. But anyway, the 4 highest ranked conference champions would be seeded 1 through 4 and get a first round bye. Then at that point, they would play the other teams. So that was the proposal. They had last Friday, they got in a room, I'm assuming, unless they did it through Zoom, and discussed what that proposal would actually mean for college football. I don't know. It sounds intriguing. I wouldn't mind seeing that, just because I think 4 is just not enough teams to be represented. 12, it's not ideal. Personally, I think 8 would be that nice number. You don't have to worry about a first round bye and whatever. But I listened to a guy, Joel Klatt, and I believe one of the things he had mentioned previously was that what we really need to do is just crack down, create 2 different types of national champions. You got your group of 5 and your Power 5 conferences. Just split it right down the middle. And the national champion that we would all care about, that would involve the Big Ten or Ohio State, would be in the Power 5 playoff system. And then you would have a lesser national champion, kind of like a Division II, Division III type champion, and that would be for the group of 5 schools. I don't know. I kind of like that idea. Obviously, it probably won't go through because nobody's talking about it. But that got me to think. I think Joel's on the right track. Honestly, with what they're doing by creating 12 teams here, you're going to give more power to, say, the AAC, the American Athletic Conference. I mean, you got some teams down there that has it all set up for themselves, like Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, Memphis. They play in some bigger time areas of the country. I just mentioned Texas, Ohio, Florida. You've got some fan bases there that are clamoring to be included, not just in a 12-team playoff, but a 4-team playoff. And so they're looking like they're going to be making some noise here, especially Cincinnati after this past season. UCF, in previous couple years ago, they're claiming that they have a national championship already because they weren't included in the 14 playoff, and they end up going undefeated. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with these teams. But the way that I look at it, if we kind of followed Joel Klatt's method, I would say move the American Athletic Conference into, say, a Power 6 scenario right there, and just take the conference championships, the winners of those conferences, So you get 6 teams there. And then, I don't know, you have your 2 wild card teams to round out the final 8 teams there. And the 7th and 8th seed, they would just go up against the 1st and 2nd ranked teams according to the selection committee. So, that would be my recommendation. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but, I'm just kind of happy to hear that they're actually moving in the right direction by expanding the playoffs, because I think everybody's on board saying that 4 teams is not enough. And I really don't care why they do it. If it's for money, cool. Help support, these universities, help support, these fan bases. So, the fans of, say, tennis or basketball, a lot of these kids get overlooked because it's not football. And, they deserve to have their scholarships. They work just as hard as football players. They need to, benefit from these full ride scholarships as well. So I really don't care why they're doing it and that they're doing it now. It just needs to be done, in my opinion. 4 teams is not enough. 12, I guess I can get on board with it. But you know what? I would really like to hear from you guys. And, I want to give a big shout out to you guys, at least going over to our Facebook page and hitting that like or follow buttons. We ended up having 12 new likes this past month. So that's pretty cool. I'm assuming that people are starting to listen to the podcast. It's kind of fun seeing those numbers tick higher and higher. And you know what? Hopefully you guys have enjoyed my show. This is our 4th show, and I've had fun doing a little bit of research on expanding the college football playoffs. And so, you know what? Please feel free to interact with me, especially on Facebook and YouTube. I've got this podcast going out on Apple and Google, Spotify, and some other places where you can find our show. And just go over to at least the Facebook page and hit the like button, subscribe on YouTube, hit those buttons, and definitely want to interact with you guys. Leave a comment or a question, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. I'll possibly read some of these comments or questions over the podcast here. I think it would be fun if I get some more interactions with you guys and just be able to talk to you about Ohio State and the state of college football. And I see my notes here that I forgot to mention that these playoffs, when they expand, it's not going to be anytime soon. I mean, it's going to probably be in another 2 years at the very earliest, so 2023. But either way, it needs to happen. I look forward to seeing what if this proposal actually goes through, or if they come up with something else. But I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be good for college football. I mean, honestly, I think 6 to 8 teams actually have a realistic shot or an opportunity to win. But either way, it'll be fun. It'll open up more of a discussion leading into the fall and into wintertime, who can win and who can represent their conference in these playoffs. So it'll be a good time. I hope we get more information coming out about this here soon. But either way, I just want to say thank you again, Buckeye Nation, for stopping by and listening to this podcast. I'm going to try to post one every 2 weeks. I was trying to get a little ambitious there, saying every week, but things happen. Got a full-time job, got to study for insurance exams, family, got a beautiful wife and 4 kids that keep me busy. So hopefully you guys understand that life gets busy, got other obligations, things that are more important than just talking about Ohio State football. But you know what? We're just doing this for fun. So hopefully you guys continue to follow me and in the podcast. Once again, make sure to go out to Facebook, hit the like button, and hopefully I get to talk to you guys here in another 2 weeks. Have a great rest of your week here. And remember, OH.